Welcome to the Empowered Homes Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to be a resource to connect church and home by growing strong families.
Hey, this is Bobby Cooley. We are going to answer the question, what is Empowered Homes, or what are Empowered Homes, and why we're doing what we're doing. And today on the show, we have Pastor Ryan Rush, the lead pastor, senior pastor at Kingsland Baptist Church. He is going to be sharing just his heart, and he loves, lives, and breathes family ministry and equipping parents and connecting church and home. And we're going to hear his heart, just a little bit about his story. The guy was music minister at the age of 15 and just never looked back. He's been reaching and going after families for his whole ministry career, and Empowered Homes, a lot of years of him investing in families. And so this is just a testimony to this podcast, to our empoweredhomes.org, to everything that we have from his leadership. And so you'll be blessed. It's really encouraging to understand that in an empowered home is nothing catastrophically different than what we're already doing. We're just trying to be more intentional with what we're doing in our homes. And so hope you enjoy. If you have more questions or want more information, you can go to empoweredhomes.org. So Ryan, welcome.
Man, glad to be here. I'm so excited about this podcast and what it means. I'm excited about what's happening around the country with leaders who are getting excited about what it means, and parents and everything else. I think we're on to something, Bobby.
Yeah, it's super exciting just knowing that God established the family first, right? And we'll talk more about that. But
sure,
how do we empower the homes in our churches to be the center of gospel transformation? And really exciting. And Ryan, before we get going, let's just tell me about your family. Tell me about, just a little bit about you and upbringing. Yeah. Those who've never heard the name Ryan Rush. Who are you, man?
Lots of people. You know what? I grew up in a great family. In fact, my mom and dad are actually members of our church. First time in my life, having served my whole adult life in ministry, they're members, and that's really cool. So really neat couple that's part of our congregation. So I was blessed to be blessed growing up. I have been married to Lana for 27 years, and just such a blessing as well. We have 3 daughters, all girls at the Rush house, no stinky boys at our place. Riley, Reagan, and Lily. Now, Riley is 25, Reagan's 23, and Lily is 12. Turns 23, turns 13 in a couple weeks. It feels like that sometimes. So yes, there's a little bit of a gap there. That's been our adventure. But also, Lily has special needs, and so she's nonverbal, has a rare genetic disorder and autism, but just delightful kid, and we're blessed by our family.
Man, so good,
the whole gamut.
So good. And we'll just jump right into this. It is no secret. If you spend any time with this man, it's no secret that you're passionate about connecting church and home. Where does that passion come from? Was there a moment where God just said, this is what I want you to be about?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's one moment where I was just enlightened by this. A part of it came from growing up in a family that wasn't perfect, but a great family where it mattered. So I got some of these things that really made an impact. But I tell you, I came to faith in Christ when I was 11. And by 13 years old or so, I really felt like God was calling me to full-time vocational ministry. And anybody who has a 13-year-old at home knows how crazy that is. Yeah. So I spent about a year starting at age 14 praying about that. I shared it with my pastor and then my parents. And then when I turned 15, I shared it with my local church. And then I went and, after I surrendered to full-time ministry, found a church that called me as minister of worship. Now think about that. I'm 15 years old, had to go get my hardship driver's license to get to church, to get to work.
That's wild.
All through high school, I was the minister of worship at this little church. And so at that time, the reason I tell that story is it's a little bitty. I mean, you can imagine how small a church is that calls a high school kid. But we had maybe 40 people at Easter, most Sundays 25. And there was no youth ministry, no children's ministry, no programs to speak of. The old generation spoken to the younger generations and vice versa. The parents were the primary faith trainers of their kids because there was no program otherwise. And so a lot of things were just natural that I took for granted. So as I grew in ministry, I went to college, went off to seminary, the larger the churches got, it seemed like programming started to replace that natural element. I wasn't against programming, but it was replacing something that it couldn't replace, with moms and dads. And so I just really, especially I guess the first few years in youth ministry, spent some years there, I realized there's only so much I can do because God has ordained mom and dad to do this. And if I can equip the parents, then this could be better.
Yeah.
And so kind of the rest is history. From there on, I've been focused on family ministry for the last 25 years.
Wow. And just knowing your passion and part of why, I feel God called me here is because I have that same heart and same desire. So when you look at one of our core values as a church of empowered homes and this podcast and everything that we're trying to do to help churches empower the homes, like if someone were to ask you, okay, what is an empowered home? Like, how would you answer that?
Right. So, Bobby, in our staff meetings, one of the most common phrases is, listen, the parents are the A team and we're the B team. So we know that in Deuteronomy 6 and really Ephesians 6, it's clear that God has ordained first the parents as the primary faith trainers. It doesn't mean that the church doesn't play a very vital role, but the most important role that the church plays is to help cultivate, strengthen the family so that parents can do the job that they were ordained to do. And so the reason that's so important, without getting in the weeds, is we're made in the image of God. You look at Genesis 1, he made us in his image, in his likeness, it says. So in other words, we've been given the capacity to reflect the attributes of God in some measure. We're not God, but God's faithful, we can be faithful. He's gracious, we can be gracious. He's good, we can be good. He's holy. All these things we can exemplify. The next thing he does is create the family. And so, first of all, the primary way, we know this naturally, the first way we think of God is usually how we think of our parents, whether that's good or bad. Some people have to unlearn a lot of stuff. But likewise, through the rest of Scripture, God manifests himself. He demonstrates himself in family terms. We know him as God the Father. We know Jesus is God the Son. We know the church is the bride of Christ. We know salvation is adoption as sons and daughters. So if you start messing with the family, it changes your whole frame of reference. So when we empower homes, we're saying we want to make sure we raise the level of what's happening here, not only so we can equip moms and dads to do what they do best, but also because that's where theology is developed, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And for those who come from difficult situations, that's where they need to unlearn some things so that they can understand sound doctrine.
So hearing you, would you say that part of empowering homes, like the number one building block in that would be investing in equipping parents? Investing in equipping parents,
Inspiring them sometimes to understand that they can. A big part of that also, by the way, is helping moms and dads undo some of the hang-ups that they have. I started to use the word walls because that's what, and I wrote a book on that, or strongholds, which is just a fancy term, but we have these false beliefs that are left over from some of our own things that happen in our upbringing that we have to say, okay, we've got to address this so that we can be better parents, understanding that it's a generation-to-generation thing. So empowering homes sometimes isn't just saying we're going to equip them. Sometimes it's we're going to give them the tools they need to heal.
Yeah, and one of the things I say often to parents is you can't disciple your kids if you've never been discipled.
Right.
And so part of our role as the church is to walk alongside them, but disciple them to help them process and unlearn some of those things that are holding them back to really the parent who's afraid they're going to mess up or they don't know what to say or how do I do this? How do I disciple? And a lot of times it starts with them. It starts with them understanding their identity in Christ.
Right.
They can't pour out anything that's not there. Right. And so as a church, it's imperative for us to help disciple our adults so that it happens at home, right?
Yeah. And let me just add, even though I know I'm stuck on this one question, I know you have other questions, but this is big, is in order to empower homes, we've got to give moms and dads the win that's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that hard. God didn't intend for it to be that way. So, for example, we talk a lot about meaningful meal times. We challenge our people all the time to enjoy 5 meaningful meal times a week with the ones they love. So if that's a single adult at home, she still needs to find someone, 3 or 4 others to share a meal time with, because that's important community. For mom and dad with kids at home, that's a study after study shows even that can make a huge difference. That's not an easy win, but it's an intentional win that can make a difference. We're going to give them the tools for celebration of specific milestones. We're going to give them the tools to have faith talks with their kids, which are just oftentimes just a few questions, just to go over some things and say, what do you think about this? So empowering homes is not just saying, okay, we're going to back up the truck and give you all this stuff. Yeah. We don't want to overwhelm people. Yeah. It's just to say, let me help you be intentional about what matters most.
Yeah, and a lot of times in church and ministry, we say, parents, you're the A team. And ministry leaders will take that as I don't have to do anything. But I would argue we have to do more.
Right.
We have to do more to make those connections at home. How do we look at our children's ministry and every program, every event? How do we look at our student ministry, every program, every event? How do we take those things that we're doing here on campus or away or whatever? How do we get that back home? Mm-hmm. And that takes more work, right? It's a little bit more difficult to empower the home and have strategy more than just having a bunch of willy-nilly programs.
That's good. And another part that involves more work is saying no to some things. Yeah. So sometimes that's really tough for a church leader to say, we can't do everything. Because if we fill up the whole calendar, then we're actually asking our parents and our families to not be home together. So part of it is to say, we can't do everything.
Yeah. So you mentioned having meaningful meal times and surrounding and capturing the milestones, leveraging those for discipleship.
Right.
Another thing we talk about is the God moments that those are unplanned, unscripted times where God just kind of lays himself into the home.
That's right.
And we challenge parents to just capture those, to be sensitive to those. Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, and this is going to be great news for some parents, because when they think, okay, I've got to have this plan and this list and all that, I would say, and you can't put a number on it, but 80 to 90% of the most impactful things you're going to do with your kid are going to be by accident. Mm-hmm. They're just going to be along the way. If you look at Deuteronomy 6, this command to the Israelites, and he says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You're to write these commands on your heart." And then he says, you're to teach them diligently to your children. But then he says, when you walk along the way, when you sit at home.
Yeah.
And he gives all these examples of just everyday life. And that's what happens. As long as you're aware and you're intentional about it, you're driving down the road. You have that time every day. So you start building into little scripts into your life, or things you're going to say, what you can talk about. When our older girls were younger, we had a common practice when we had dinner, or we'd have what we called sticky situations. I think there was a book by that name. It's probably still out there if you look on Amazon. But really what we'd do, sometimes we made up our own. We'd say, girls, they're like first grade, third grade, something like that. All right, you're spending the night with some friends and somebody breaks out a 6-pack of beer. Says, I snuck this out of my dad's fridge. What are you going to do? And they're looking at us like, this would never happen. We're like, okay, but just let's say. And so but they'd say something simple. Well, I'd say no. Okay, what if they make fun? And the whole reason we do that is we're just trying to think of case studies. It wasn't that complicated. They looked forward to it. Yeah. But then years later, they were oftentimes they'd come home and say, it happened. Yeah. It really happened, just like you said. And we'd already replayed this. Yeah. So it's simple stuff like that. When I used to drop the girls off at school, that was a part of my dad, not responsibilities, but my privilege, our routine. They got used to it, but every day I'd get there and say, Riley, remember what I asked you to do today. What's your job? I'd say the same thing to Reagan. And so I'd sound real official. They knew what I was doing. Yeah. And they'd say, change the world. And I'd say, yeah, that's it. I'm just asking one thing. That's what your job is before you come home today. Yeah. Change the world. So I'm speaking in something simple, but I'm letting them know God has equipped you to look outwardly, missionally at the world.
Yeah. And
stuff like that.
And simple for me and my kids, I walk them to school every day, and on the way, I want them to have a heart of gratitude. I don't want them to be selfish and spoiled brats. And so every day I ask them, hey, tell me one thing you're thankful for.
It's awesome.
Or tell me someone you're thankful for. And every day, sometimes we get the same stuff, and there's nothing profound day by day. But then my daughter will say, "I'm thankful that you spent time with me playing Legos last night." Like, she thought about that, and it just, she's thinking about all the things around her that's beyond herself. And so it's not adding one more thing to your already busy, crazy calendar as a parent. I know we're overwhelmed. It's just being intentional in the everyday rhythms of life, of what do you do in the car? How do you have those conversations? Bedtime, being very intentional of just communicating to your kids and doing all these things. And so for us, we talk about habits. And one of the things that we often get asked is, okay, so we want to do all these things. We want to empower homes. How do we measure that? Like, parents actually doing it, how do we see it? Like, what does that look like?
Right. And it's important, not because we want it to be regimented, but because we want to at least have a way to look back and say, okay, are we doing this? Even though it's natural, it needs to be intentional, because we all know situations, probably in our own lives, but at least in others, where you look back and said, man, we meant to have dinner together. We meant to do this. And I wish we had that time back. So we want to make the most of every opportunity, as Paul says in Ephesians. One way to do that, we talk about sometimes, at least behind the scenes, the home acrostic. So H stands for hold to the habits. Yeah. Habits are real simple. You already mentioned that. I think those are helpful to parents because they're not something that you have to check a box. They just become a part of life. Rest is the first habit. Have you had some time just to get away with the Lord today? Have you showed your kids that the TV can turn off and you can just have some quiet moments before the Lord? The O is own the table. We already talked about that. The M is mark the milestones. So are we taking advantage of the milestones in our lives? Not only the ones, we have some built-in ones here that have been here for a long time. Pastor Brian Haynes has helped to implement those, and we do them a little bit differently, but I love what Brian Haynes has done. You can learn more online about that. Yeah. And then the E, engage beyond the home. That's one of the, I think, or rather, the go is the last habit. It's also the E in the acrostic. So we need to go. We need to move outside of our comfort zone and love other people and engage in community, right? And so that's it. We have the habits, hold of the habits, own the table, mark the milestones, engage beyond the home. When we do these things, now we can look back and say, hey, how's it going? That's what I love, incidentally, about the mealtime, because I think it's so tied in intricately with all these things. When I look at my own life rhythms and most families, when the meal times go away, a lot of times that's a good thermometer of how we're really being intentional with our kids. So we can go back there, and vice versa. When we do have 5 meaningful meal times a day, or a week, not a day, that'd be a lot of eating. If we have 5 meaningful meal times a week, now you have a built-in way to speak to your kids. I mean, it happens naturally. So you have the questions, you have all these things. So if you just commit to that, it's amazing how all these other things play into it, right? So that if I was to reduce to one scorecard, how's your meal times with your kids?
Yeah. It sounds so easy, but it's so profound. Right. And even thinking of my own life and my family, like when stress and anxiety is at a high, and maybe marriage is, we're not communicating well, I can use that as a barometer to be like, man, we're crazy. We haven't sat down as a family just to talk and eat together. It's easy, measurable for that. One of the things we have here at Kingsland is, we have a big vision. You have a big vision as you lead our staff and our church of reaching 10,000 homes.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah.
Can you just tell us what does that mean to reach 10,000 homes?
Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't mean, first of all. It doesn't mean that we're trying to have 10,000 households at Kingsland. Yeah. That's not the goal. God can do that however he wants to do that. Our goal is to see 10,000 homes transformed. And that means 10,000 homes where it's not just, okay, we really care about the family, or, oh, we're going to join a church, but where all of a sudden the gospel becomes manifest in that family, such that we're not just raising smart kids, we're raising kids with an outward focus on the world, moving in the direction of hurting people that understand their place because our homes are gospel-centered. and something magnificent happens. So we've seen some examples of that. But what that means also is that I believe if some other churches, God's already raising up these churches. It's not, we haven't cornered the market on this, and I'm so grateful. God's doing a work, I think, in churches around the country in this way, where we're speaking into this and homes start to happen. I don't think anybody listening would argue that our nation is in crisis. I mean, it's at least in some measure. I was thinking the other day about right before the Second Great Awakening, 1790, we just finished the Revolutionary War. The United States was a mess. And when people say, it's never been worse than it is now, it was worse then. I mean, when the vice president shoots the former secretary of the Treasury and kills him, that's probably pretty bad. I mean, politically, okay? When it's just, you go on and on. The percentage, if you look at any of the history of those who are addicted to alcohol at the time, was incredibly sad. Sexual assault was rampant when you read some of those things. There's a lot of times you don't read. It's just a really tough time. Churches are empty. The colleges have kind of forsaken God. That might sound familiar to some. And in the midst of this, God brings about this revival through prayer. Now, when I look at what's happening in our age, in our time, there's a lot of parallels, but what I really see is this head-on attack, this frontal assault by the enemy on our families. And I really think in order for revival to come, there has to be transformation that happens in the home.
Yeah.
In the home. And so the reason 10,000, I think it is a number that God put on our hearts to pray toward, but it feels as though 10,000 homes is a tipping point. If there's 10,000 homes in our land that really are set on fire about what the Lord's doing, and not just, yes, I want them to attend church. It's going to be a part of it. That's one of the habits. We gather. But it's more than that, because we're pouring into the next generation in these intentional ways. Then I don't think it stops at 10,000. Then it becomes 10,000 times 10. But that's the reason for that. We're asking God to raise up these homes that are transformed by the power of the gospel.
It's so good. And when the gospel is transforming inside the home, the beautiful thing is it's seen and felt by the neighbors next door. And that's something to rally behind. And like you said, it's not about getting 10,000 people on a church campus. It's about it's kingdom work.
Right. It is kingdom work. Yeah. And speaking of that, here's what's really interesting about the family and connecting church and home. There are people listening who may be from totally different religious backgrounds, and they may disagree with the whole idea that the world needs Jesus at this point. I understand that. Okay, I believe with all my heart, as sure as I'm in front of you right now, that Jesus is the only hope for the world. But everybody listening, I've never met a person who didn't believe that the family was important. Who didn't believe the family was important for their own frame of reference, the challenges they're facing right now, everything else, but also that the family is important for the future of the health of the land of any country. And so this is a bridge to our culture today that for a lot of people has kind of forsaken or walked away and said, I'm not really interested in that. Everybody cares about the family. You can't care deeply about the family without saying why, and it comes back to this image of God thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So if you're listening and you're wanting more information on Empowered Homes, we have empoweredhomes.org, where we have resources of all the habits that we talked about and the milestones that we've talked about and all these things. So be sure and go through the website. If you have any questions, you can email info@empoweredhomes.org. Pastor, thank you for your heart and thank you for your leadership. We're excited to see what God's going to do.
Man, I'm right with you. I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Empowered Homes podcast. For more content and information to connect church and home, please visit empoweredhomes.org.